Welcome to Only Ghosts in the Building. This is your host, Emily Claire.
And Karen Lynn.
And Fort Mifflin's paranormal host, Greg O'Brien.
Yay!
Thanks for being here, Greg.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Also called Mud Island Greg. Is that okay by that?
Mud Island, yeah, no.
Mud Island.
Mr. Fort Mifflin, a lot of people call him.
So you are Haunted Fort Mifflin. You
Yes.
are the host there. We took a tour at night and you gave us an introduction on the history a little bit when we went in. But there's a lot of history there.
A lot more.
So, and the history is that it was originally called Mud Island because it's outside of Philadelphia, but it's surrounded by water.
It was, yeah, when way back, it was all kinds of islands out there. So it was Mud Island, Little Mud Island, Providence Island, Carpenter's Island. So, when the fort was laid out in 1771 by the British, it was an island at that time. So eventually now they filled in and it's landlocked. But at that time, it was Mud Island. And it lives up to its name to this day.
And that's because it's in a marshy area.
Marshy area, and we are actually below the river level. So we sit low. So there's a seawall that keeps us from flooding.
Kind of
flooding constantly. Yes, and
So we were supposed to go in March of this year.
right.
And then because we had storms.
Yeah, we
They
had
said
some,
you don't wanna be mucking
bad winter storms. We had, I guess, a big nor'easter came, and the winds were so bad that it blew the roof off our officers' quarters. It just peeled the roof off, and the right next door is the Army Corps of Engineers, and the people that were over there said they were on the dredger, the McFarland. They were crewed. Because the storm was coming, so they had the crew all ready in case something went. And they actually said that the waves were going up to 6 feet over the seawall. So
Wow.
we were flooded big time. It was like a swimming pool. The whole grounds were underwater. Casemates were all 6, 8 inches of water.
And they kind of sit lower than even the main area.
Yeah, and plus you get water that seeps up too. That's why March was then postponed to
Yeah.
In June.
And even still, like the one place where there's the bunk beds in there, that was.
Sallyport.
There, we were like trying to get in there, like,
Yes.
Yeah, it's all that, but that's always like that.
Yeah.
Because that's closest to the moat. The moat fort is surrounded by a complete.
So is that moat natural? That's man-made
Yes,
moat.
that
And
was
was that made before the fort was built, or?
That was put in after when they rebuilt it. It was destroyed by the British in 1777. And when it was rebuilt under John Adams, you had French engineer and French workers. So I guess the French wanted a moat.
So they put the moat in there. So that's kind of brings us to the history. It was originally a British installation.
It was laid out in 1771 by British to protect Philadelphia, which was your largest English-speaking city.
And then I
province.
read that they did that because William Penn really wasn't.
It was a Quaker.
interested
So the
into-
Quaker, yeah.
right.
So there was, they're pacifists. So so there was no defense.
And who were they defending from?
You had the French, you had the Portuguese, you had pirates, you had the Spanish. Everybody was trying to make their claim in the New World. So they wanted to defend it.
Okay, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it was laid out in 1771, British engineer, Captain John Montresor. He was your British engineer designing it. And of course, like anything, he was going over budget. And by 1773, they said, that's enough.
Is it because he wanted to make it state of the art, or?
Yeah, and I guess too because the issues being on the ground, the mud, and everything had to be shipped to the fort.
But the Delaware River's right there, so
Right,
it wasn't
Delaware
a big
River's right
deal.
there, so, yeah.
Okay.
So, everything had to come in by boat, so you had all those stones, and, so, it just, was running over budget, so.
So they quit working on it in
They quit.
1773,
About 1773, and then it sat for a while, and then,
and no one was occupying at that point.
and then 1775, you have the shot heard around the world up in Concord, and that's when good old Ben Franklin said, "Hey, we need to defend the city." So, well, we got this laying out there that the British started building, so we're going to go out there and fortify it.
They occupied the fort at that point. The
Right, yep.
Americans occupied the
Yeah, it
fort,
was
or
called-
the,
Yep. Franklin's organized a committee of safety.
Okay.
So the Americans then came to fortify it, and they just had log and earth where the British stopped building. If you come to the fort today, you can still see original British built. It's the granite stones that are on the east and the north side. The west and the south side is just bricks. So that would have been the log and earth emplacement from 17.
so the east is sort of towards the Delaware River.
East is the Delaware River, and then there's the north face
side.
is right on the Delaware.
Was right there,
yeah,
okay.
The main gate is the east side, so if you go out the main gate, you'll see the original stone.
Okay.
And there is cannon fire damage, cannonball fire.
Is that where you climb up and over, or that's not the Sally Port? That's not
Not the
where
Sally Port.
where we came in.
Right, that's the southeast Sally Port. Yeah, you
here.
come into East Sally Port,
Okay.
and then this is the West Sally Port over here.
Okay.
Okay.
And then you have your main gate right through there.
Which people
Okay.
can't really see where you're pointing to.
Right.
If you
And
look
we have a
map,
map here, so just bringing everybody up. Yeah.
but there's three different
Three
different
three-
Sally Ports,
Two Sally Ports and one main gate.
one main gate.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Sally Ports were guard stations, so you had little rooms on each side of those openings where guards would stay, and they would do their guard duties. So you had different shifts, so they would be. That's where they were stationed.
And they could view the Delaware, see anything coming,
Yep.
and how far across is New Jersey from that point? It's not that
It's not that far at all. No,
It's very close,
It's
right?
very close.
And
yeah.
there's a fort across.
There was a fort in Fort Mercer.
Fort Mercer.
Battle
Okay.
Redback.
Okay.
And that was destroyed by the British, but that wasn't rebuilt.
Okay, so that, when I was talking about another fort, I had read there was a fort that they used, the combination of forts to control the river, to
Correct.
keep the British from coming into Philadelphia, which would have been built during or after
It was-
1776.
It was built. Yeah, it was,
After that.
they built that.
So the
yeah.
revolutionists would have,
Yes.
I guess they weren't called Americans yet, right?
Well, they would have been after the Declaration of Independence. you would
Okay,
think.
then they would be
Yeah, 'cause-
considered Americans.
Yeah, because the battle was 1777. So
Okay.
I've had people say, yeah, I call them the Patriots, but they were Americans because we declared our independence.
That's
then,
right, and if
so,
they're fighting for our side, they would have been Americans.
Yep.
Okay. Just want to get the terminology straight.
Right. So 1775, Franklin gets organized, gets some funds, they refortify it, and then comes 1777, the British sail from New York and they come all the way down to the Chesapeake because they know the fortifications on the Delaware because they were built, they're the ones that built them. So they sailed all the way down to Chesapeake and they marched from Maryland, and they had the big battle of Brandywine on September 21st, 1777, which was your largest land battle of the Revolutionary War. Washington got outflanked, had to retreat, so that's why then Continental Congress had to abandon Philadelphia. They went over to York and they took the Liberty Bell and hid it in a church up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So they get melted down to be used as cannonballs. So Howe then marched into, well, there was the Battle of There was Battle of Clouds, it was the Paoli Battle, the Battle of the Clouds, Battle of Germantown, and of course they were all defeats by Washington. And so Howe marched into Philadelphia on September 26th. Then you had a small group of 200 men at the fort.
They were kind of stuck at the
They were
fort,
stuck
right?
at the
They
fort.
couldn't get.
And they eventually reinforced it with up to 400 men. Washington gave the orders to hold to the last extremity. So from September through November, these guys fought and held the British off. And there was up to 1,500 British ships on the river trying to come up.
Wow.
And these guys had put chains across the river, and they sunk logs with spikes under the river, just below water level. So the British got stuck right there. So they couldn't go any further. So that's when the big battle started. You know, Fort Mercer and Fort Mifflin were both attacking and both being attacked. Howe had orders that had the Hessians attack Fort Mercer.
So the Hessians came to support the British,
Yep,
and they attacked Fort Mercer.
they attacked Fort Mercer and they got their butts kicked at Fort Mercer.
Oh, did they?
And then it was concentrated on the fort. It became the largest naval bombardment of the Revolutionary War. They had built land batteries during that time. You know, it was like 5 weeks. So they built land batteries on the shores again.
What's a land battery?
Yeah, it was an island, so they built cannon emplacements
Okay.
on the shore.
Okay.
So they were called land batteries. So they built those cannon emplacements around the fort, and then they just started opening up and bombarding the fort. And it's estimated 1,000 to 1,100 cannonballs an hour.
Wow.
And these
No
guys
place to hide.
No place to hide. Again, the buildings that would have been there would have been all wooden buildings, and it was earth and log, and they were fighting all during the day, and then they were trying to repair during the night. These guys were just getting decimated.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, they were given a option of those that can retrieve cannonballs that we can shoot back at the British would get a ration of rum.
Really? Well, that
Yeah.
would be worthwhile then.
Yeah,
Go out and dig the
Yeah.
cannonballs
I got you,
out of
cannonballs.
I gotcha. Well, eventually it didn't work out too well because after so many shots, instead of trying to retrieve a cannonball, they were fighting over to try and catch a cannonball, and it didn't work out. So it's well documented.
So where were most of the men from? From the Philadelphia area?
No, they
Were
were from Virginia down up from New England. They were
From all over.
From all over.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's some Delaware. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
So,
yep. So the Pennsylvania was under Anthony Wayne. He had lost the Battle of Brandywine prior, so his troops were still out in Chester County and out in that area. They weren't there at the fort. So
It's funny because I am not a history person. So when you're doing this, I'm like putting myself in like Outlander when they come over here. And I'm like, okay, so the British. And that's where I'm like playing, I have a play going on in my head with all Outlander people.
well, you know Outlander, the TV.
yeah,
Netflix. Okay, so yes.
The book.
Is he Scottish?
The books.
The
Yeah.
books, the
Yeah.
multitude
He's Scottish,
of books.
right?
Scottish, and she's English.
But at one point they come over,
yeah.
prior to the Revolutionary War, it's settled when England was really settling the new country, and they were giving acres of land, thousands
Yeah.
of acres to
Fraser's Ridge.
people that were loyal to the crown.
Loyal to the crown.
Yeah.
So that's,
But he wasn't
What
really
she's talking
actually
about, and that would be-
loyal to the crown. He
No,
was
but-
loyal to his one dude. Sorry. Wow. But that's how my brain works. I have to like put it in movie or.
but that's
TV
how he
show.
got the land, is
Yeah.
saying that he was, but then he really wasn't.
Yeah.
But that's
and
a
then
different
he,
story.
And he threw
We
the red
digress.
coat. He threw the red coat back at him. He said, "I'm done."
We digress. So anyway, the guys got slaughtered.
They got slaughtered.
No one
Out of-
got off alive.
Well, out of 400, you had 150 that were able to
Did they surrender?
They never surrendered.
Okay.
The flag, we have the flag of Fort Mifflin. That's red, white, and blue stripes, 13 stripes.
Oh, cool.
That, I have a copy of it somewhere. But we know for a fact that that was made by a famous Philadelphia seamstress
Named Betsy Ross?
named Betsy Ross.
Oh, cool.
And
Awesome.
You
that
should put a
flew over
picture
the
of that.
fort, and that's the flag
Yes.
we fly at the fort all the time. During the battle, you had Pennsylvania Navy out there, and the flag was flying, and they were ordered to bring the flag down, to put another flag up to signal for the Navy to do some attacking. And when they were bringing the flag down, the British thought they were surrendering, so they stopped firing. But the men at the fort thought also that they were surrendering, so they told them, they yelled and told them to put the flag back up. So they hoisted the flag back up, and the British then immediately started firing, and it's documented the guys that put the flag up got hit right away and killed. But when they abandoned the fort, they left it still flying. So they muffled their oars and rowed across the Delaware over to New Jersey to Fort Mercer.
Oh, so they fled to New Jersey.
Yeah, on
Okay.
November 15th, yeah. 1776.
300 and some people were killed that day at the fort, or that period of time. In one
Out of
day,
400, you had 150 left, so
Yeah,
yeah, you
yeah,
had,
so-
and you had like 250. But yeah, you had British casualties also. Two British ships were sunk, the Augusta and the Merlin. Augusta ran up on a sandbar, but then Merlin came around to try and assist it, and Augusta got blown up, and then the Merlin got blown up too. So the British always blame, they said, the Americans didn't do it, it blew up by accident.
Oh, yeah. Whoops. Our mistake.
Yeah, but it was so loud, people that all the way up to Germantown, they said the windows were rattling
Really?
because it was such a
Because they had all that
all
munition
that
on board.
munitions on it. Yeah, because they were coming up to supply Wayne, Al in Philadelphia. They marched all the way from Maryland. They did all these fighting, and okay. We need more supplies. So that was the whole reason for them coming up to Delaware. So these guys held them off through November 15th.
Thank you, Sandbar.
Yep, and then
Or we'd be speaking
yeah.
English right now.
yeah, well,
English,
English,
not American English.
No, we should speak in German.
That's German could be, yeah.
Yeah, because Britain would have fallen.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah,
Yikes.
so yeah, all the way through November, and then this enabled Washington to have a retreat back to Valley Forge. Now there were some skirmishes in between. There was the Battle of White Marsh and everything, but then he established winter quarters in Valley Forge in December.
Yeah.
So they didn't get their resupplies because even after the fort fell, even though after it was destroyed, there were still the obstacles in the river, the spikes and the chains
Yeah, I
that the
forgot
British
about
had
those.
to deal with.
Yeah, I forgot
So
about
it
those.
took them quite some time before they could clear all that. So they were just sending smaller boats from the big
Yeah.
ships up to
Okay.
on offload. So it took some time. So that's why, the fort became known as the Fort That Saved America, because it helped.
The fort that saved America.
It
I
helped
love that.
Washington
Yeah.
to establish his winter quarters in Valley Forge.
And you are the expert on the fort that saved America. How's that special as that?
Yeah, no,
That
it
was
is.
special.
To me, it's most hallowed ground in the country, really.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, these guys sacrificed. These
They
guys,
did.
I mean, they just
That had been so frightening.
so frightening. I mean, and it was just nonstop. You're dealing with the cannon fire all day. You're trying. I mean, yeah, and then at night you're trying to fix things,
Yeah.
and then it's just
So-
amazing.
So then the British came in and took back over
British-
the fort
yeah, they-
along with the,
Yep, they took, they came in, the Americans burned and destroyed everything they could before they fled. And then when the British came, of course, they leveled everything they could. And then they went over to Fort Mercer and leveled that off too.
So they were like, well, if we don't have it, you can't either.
Right, they don't want them to come back and use
Yeah,
it.
really, yeah.
President John Adams decides to rebuild the fort,
1790s.
1790s. But
So why did he decide to rebuild the fort?
well, Philadelphia was still the capital of the United States still, and he wanted to
Protect it.
protect it
Okay.
because the channel of the Delaware River goes right in front of the fort.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to the fort, it's amazing. You'll see the big tankers going
Yep.
by and all
We
the
were there, we
ships.
saw one, and
Yeah.
it's high, it
It's
looks
high,
high.
It's high. We're below the river
Compared
level.
to-
And,
He
so,
was like, wow.
especially when you get one of those car carriers that are like 10 stories high and you're like, wow.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so he built it to defend the city of Philadelphia. So he rebuilt that in 1798.
Mhm. And then it was occupied at that point?
It was
and
occupied
so they
at that
kept
point.
troops
Yep,
there.
Yep. And then
Did they have to use it for any reason? Was
they
it
didn't
pretty
have to
much-
use it for any reason. You had the War of 1812, but by then Philadelphia was not the capital.
It
They
went to
established
Washington.
Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
So the British didn't come up, but it was manned. There was some battles around Cape May, but they really didn't do anything up the Delaware. It was always, down in the Chesapeake, with McHenry and everything. It was, they would have a sparsely crew there, and then if anything would come up, they would reman it. But when it was being rebuilt under Adams, you had a French engineer was in charge of rebuilding it, and so you had French troops. People did pick up French.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, we did.
And I always tell that. We had one time a scouts sleepover, and they had their tents, and they were there over the weekend. And Monday, this one woman of the scouts called up and was asking about. She's like, I'm just really curious because I got waking up during the night. What I thought was wagon wheels going back and forth, and then I heard a man in French. Now he was yelling, but it wasn't like he was mad, but he was just yelling in French. And she's like, I don't understand why I would be hearing a man yelling orders in French.
Uh-huh.
It's like, well, it was the French engineers that, there was a French engineer during, when it was during the 1777, the Flory under Washington. He was like his big time engineer. So he was there during the siege. And then you had the other French engineer come in and when they were rebuilding it. So you get the French speaking. But it was during the yellow fever epidemic.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So people died there.
People were dying, yeah. That was a big yellow fever epidemic that was sweeping through
And that was
Philadelphia.
before they realized quinine could cure
Yeah.
yellow fever?
Yep. You had the French slaves uprise down in Haiti for the sugar cane.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a merchant in Philadelphia called Stephen Girard. So he sent his ships down to get the French out. So when the French were coming back, they were a lot of them were sick, and they brought their slaves up too. And so that's how basically the yellow fever spread with that. They brought the mosquitoes, they were on the boat coming up.
They didn't recognize that there was a boundary line that they
Yep.
shouldn't cross. They
Right.
just came on in,
So-
along with
Yep.
probably other pestilence.
So you had all these
happens.
yellow fever deaths.
Yeah.
They needed gin and tonics, man.
Yeah. Some rum, a lot of rum. They
Lot of
got
rum.
sugar cane now, so they make it all that rum.
That's
Yeah.
right.
But yeah, so at that point, they had any ship coming up. Philadelphia had started called a lazaretto in the 1740s. It was on an island just north of Mud Island, Fort Mifflin. It was called Providence Island. Back then, recognized that anybody who was getting sick, they put them out there.
So it was like an isolation
It was
area.
an isolation area. So yeah, the ships that were coming up were getting stopped at Fort Mifflin, boarded. Anybody that was sick was then taken to the lazaretto of Providence Island.
Okay.
But then the ship was anchored off the fort for, could be weeks or months to make
While
sure
the
no one else.
incubation
Right,
periods
right.
gone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you had all those yellow fever deaths there.
Now, can you go on the Province Island?
It's That is the no island anymore, and that is part with the Army Corps of Engineers. That property that used to be all the part of the fort, but then when it was deeded to the city in '62, the federal government kept all this land that was all fort. They just deeded the historic part to the city.
So the city of Philadelphia actually owns
the fort. Yes.
Okay.
It was deeded to them in '62.
And is that who runs it now? Is it
No.
through the?
No, it's a nonprofit.
You have nonprofits, and that's
Nonprofit,
okay.
Fort Mifflin on the Delaware. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we unfortunately don't get any support from the city. It's
So
another
your
story.
tours or how?
Tours and all our events is what keeps it
Events.
going.
Yeah.
We
So when the
def-
Boy Scouts camp there, do they know it was haunted? Is that?
They knew it was haunted, but no one knew about the French.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they excited do they still do that? Do you still have Boy Scouts come
We
in?
still have Boy Scouts. Between paranormal and Boy Scouts, the scouting is basically our bread and butter.
Yeah.
Paranormal, scouting, and then some school
School
group stuff.
tours.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our bread and butter.
So if you could license the airspace over there, you could charge all the airline companies for flying over the
Yeah.
airport.
Well, that's what a lot of people come in there. Can we use a drone here? No. You can't even attempt it because its signal is killed.
I was
Yeah.
surprised how low those planes are
Oh,
when
yeah.
they're doing
Yeah.
that approach.
Well, when they did that, when you come into the fort now, you go into that tunnel. That was the last runway they built, just about, I guess, maybe 10 so years ago. So that's how close it is now. And where that runway is, that's where the land batteries were.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
So, but yeah, that
Interesting.
Lazaretto that on Providence Island, that is now where the dredging is dumped.
The spoils from
yeah,
the-
when McFarland dredges the Delaware, so that's where it's all dumped back there.
So they're making another island.
So it's
It's all landlocked now.
It's gonna be
it's
condos
haunted.
in a few years.
It's haunted dredged.
It's haunted dredge, yes. Yes, that Lazaretto does not exist anymore.
Because
yeah.
that probably would have been super haunted with
Would've-
all those deaths.
Yeah, all those deaths right
Yeah.
there. Yeah, it would have been. So I imagine, maybe you guys working back there hear some things.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, yeah.
Creepy.
And would they care? I mean,
Yeah,
some people don't even,
Yeah.
like, okay,
I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
never.
But
But we
yeah.
all go, "Wah, it's haunted."
Let's go visit it.
I don't hear anything.
It wasn't me.
But yeah, then, I guess say 1812 battle, we didn't, no activity, and then
So the 1812 wasn't impacted at all?
No.
And then when was the Civil War was the next?
Civil War came, yeah,
Okay.
the fort was, done some modifications, Secretary of War Stanton, came in, did a lot of modifications, refortified the fort, cannons, gun emplacements, so then it was manned for the Civil War, but it became a military prison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The casemates that are there, originally they would have been bomb shelters under John Adams, but they became the prison cells for
That
Civil War.
must have been a pretty gruesome place to
Yep,
be housed, right?
yep, oh yeah. I mean, it's just,
'Cause
you
it's
guys have been in there.
damp
It's
and
damp,
wet.
it's wet, and
Dark?
and dark, and they were just shoved in there. So there was Confederate Union prisoners and civilian political prisoners.
So Union
out there.
prisoners would have been people that,
Deserters, any
deserted,
kind
right.
of military crime,
Yeah, okay.
mostly deserters.
so again, a lot of deaths
A lot
probably.
of death. It was
Right.
very, as you say, it's damp, and they had they called it a half barrel for the waste, and that would have
Oh,
been
gosh.
kept in the back wall, and you had men shoved in there, and basically there was no beds. They slept on the ground, and they basically slept in their own waste.
Ugh.
And they were given a half candle at night, one half candle for everybody that was in there, so that they could write a letter or read a letter.
It's not big.
No,
Not at all.
no, they were
No, I
shoved
can't imagine.
Like right on top of each other.
right on top of each other. And
Oof.
so disease, mostly dysentery,
Yeah.
Yeah.
ran through. So you had a lot of deaths from the prisoners, but it ran through the garrison. So you had the deaths in the fort.
How many soldiers were there? And did their families come to stay with them as well?
Yes, the soldiers that manned it, that had their wives and children there.
So they would have had that.
Yeah, they would, and they were dying too. So Elizabeth Bunker, one of our famous Elizabeths, she was there and died in the 1860s. I think it was 1864, and she was like 62 years old. And they listed it as GI, but it would have been dysentery.
Dysentery,
Yeah.
right.
And but a lot of death.
But on all sides.
All sides.
Yeah.
All sides.
So that was a good idea to cram everybody into that little wet island, right?
Yeah. And then
Who thought of that?
and a lot of people don't know about, as they call them, the political prisoners or the civilian prisoners.
Mhm.
That's what I have these books about. American Bastille,
So that,
John A. Marshall.
Johnny Marshall.
Yeah.
And
Sounds like
he wanted to document
Wow.
as many political prisoners as he can. And he wrote this back in 1883.
and political prisoner would be someone that,
Anybody that opposed Lincoln,
okay.
opposed the war.
Mm-hmm.
If you were a pastor and during your sermon
Mm-hmm.
you said negative about the war,
Mm-hmm.
you got thrown in prison.
How about Quakers? Because they are pacifists.
They were pacifists.
So they kind of left them
They left them,
because
yeah.
they didn't really speak against it, but they were
So they get
for it either.
a pacifist.
A pacifist. Oh my gosh.
I had to throw a
That
pun
was
in
really
somewhere. Listen, I learned it from you.
But yeah, I mean, we had a group from upstate Pennsylvania. It was called the Fishing Creek Confederacy or Conspiracy. It was a group of civilians that opposed the war, so they refused to report for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Conscientious objectors. Right?
yeah, so Lincoln sent some troops up. It was a patrol that got ambushed. A Union officer was killed. He sent more troops and he just rounded up everybody he could because they the rumor came out that there was a fort built there with fortifications. And there was nothing up there when they got up there, but they just rounded up people. So there was 44 of them sent down here. I mean their ages ran from the 30s all the way to 68 years old.
He was the oldest, 68.
68, Joseph Coleman. And, but yeah, they were farmers, carpenters, painters, lumbermen, merchants, blacksmiths, just regular townspeople, all just sent to the fort, and again, they succumbed to disease.
He perished.
So this is actually super interesting that when people get names, you have a book.
Got a book with the name.
check.
With names in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, have names. People that were in prison there, guys that died there, and we're still finding different names of prisoners.
We had a Rosemary that came in a bunch.
Rosemary, we got it several times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
And all over the place.
the females. It's just it's not a lot about the females.
Yeah.
So were they also taken political prisoners as well? Or because they were married to a husband that was a political prisoner, would
No,
they have
didn't
been taken
They
along?
just took them.
And-
They were taking the men.
Just the men, not the
Okay.
children and wives.
Yeah. And then there was another group from Clearfield, Pennsylvania, 40, and there was a sitting judge at that time, Jacob Wilhelm. He was a sitting judge, and he got sent. Yeah, a lot of the wives came, and they were prevented from coming into the fort, so they were like set up tents and stuff outside the fort.
Interesting.
Mhm.
And so yeah.
Well, they did that really with a lot of the encampments too. There would be women that would, the wives and
Right, just come around and yeah.
people.
They had money, they could basically bribe some of the guards, because they were giving them stale food and
I
rotten
can
meat
imagine, yeah.
and the blankets would be the ones with the mice that ate holes in. So
It's also a food source, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
These guys could at
Your
least, if they
little
have some
mousy
money.
head off.
Yeah. These guys at least give some guards some money and get a blanket that didn't have holes in it. So, but
Hey,
yeah,
can you
it was-
imagine the winter?
Oh yeah, sleeping in there.
So
I mean, it's
cold.
damp. There was, There's 5 casemates in there, 1 through 5.
And did they sleep in all of the 5 of them?
They slept in all of 5. The smaller ones ended up being, now you have the first one, casemate 1, that's where the Confederates were kept. Casemate 5, all the way at the end of the casemate tunnels, was where the Union prisoners ended up being kept. Political prisoners were originally held in there, but then they got moved to the smaller casemates that were originally just for storage, and they were thrown in the smaller ones.
Wow.
So, and plus we had a group of Molly Maguires that were sent to the fort. The Irish. The uprisings, they sent 60 of them.
Even though it wasn't a political thing, it was because of the uprising with the miners?
The miners.
Really?
Yeah, they sent 60 Molly Maguires down there before they got sent back up to Jim Thorpe and Pottsville to be tried and hung. So yeah, it's
So they had one hanging, right?
We had the one hanging, William Howe. There were other executions by firing squad, but William Howe was a Union prisoner. He was actually a war hero. He picked up the drop flag at the Battle of Fredericksburg and carried it through victory. But then he became ill, probably dysentery, which was very common. Didn't report to a field hospital because at that time, there was very
pretty gruesome conditions.
Gruesome, no hygiene.
Yeah.
You can go in with a cut and end up getting infected and died.
Right.
So he walked from Fredericksburg down in Virginia all the way up to his house up in Perkiomen.
So he was considered a deserter
He got considered a deserter.
because he was ill.
Yeah.
Okay.
He wanted to go home and recover. Eventually, federal marshals were sent to his house. They bang on the door in the middle of the night and they don't identify themselves. There's a shot fired. One of the marshals is killed. Hal tries to run. They track him down and he's thrown down at the fort. So that was William Howe. And he was kept, he got thrown into solitary confinement, which is casemate 11, and Hal's there. And then that's
The one over there, right?
over the steps go down.
Okay.
Solitary. And he was housed in there, then taken to Eastern State Penitentiary
Yeah.
and held there and tried and convicted of desertion and murder, and then brought back to the fort where he was hung. And it was a public execution. It was the only public execution at the fort where they actually sold tickets.
People would come and see the execution.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, pre-cable,
I know.
What do you have to do
Some
today?
kind of entertainment.
We gotta watch somebody get hung.
Let's get in our
Where would they
person
have done
drive
the
down
firing squad?
Firing squads are always out over
Okay.
over by the picnic, what we call a
And
picnic area.
So is there where did they bury people? Is there
The barrier, when you come in, that building in by the parking lot, that was the old hospital building.
Oh, okay. That's where we
Yeah.
originally pulled in, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's the hospital building built in the 1820s. So the cemetery would have been behind the hospital building.
Okay.
In the late 1870s, they started excavating in the bodies to put them in a new federal cemetery in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, word got out that they were exhuming bodies. Grave robbers started coming in to see if there was
Is anything good?
good.
So there's still bodies there?
There's
or-
probably still bodies
So
there.
have you ever done any kind of investigation there?
Yes, it's very active in there because a lot of people died. If they didn't die in prison, they were taken over there being sick and died. Elizabeth Bunker actually died in the hospital building.
So tell me about Elizabeth Bunker.
Well, she was married to an officer there, and
This is during the Civil War.
Civil War. Yeah, she became ill and ended up over the hospital building. Now, I always thought there's a spirit that's there. He's called Edward, and he's identified himself as Edward. And you're over there, you hear footsteps walking around, you hear things moving around. You can be, when there's a group overnight, that's where anybody that stays the night will stay over there during the night. And you hear the footsteps, and you hear doors, and you hear everything. One night I was there by myself. I'm just sitting there, and I hear footsteps go by, and I just think it's Edward. And we have a bathroom upstairs, and of course, being a male, I just left the seat up, because And
Nobody else there.
No one else there.
No one to nag you.
And I hear the footsteps go by, and all of a sudden the toilet seat gets slammed closed. Bam!
So she didn't like it.
Right, I said, Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were around tonight. I'm sorry, I thought there was just Edward here. So everybody now knows to put the seat down.
Put the seat down.
At least you didn't hear a splash. That would have been her falling in,
Yeah.
because I've done that. Thanks, Rich.
Oh, when you go to
So-
sit down and it's like.
In the middle of the night.
Oh.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Elizabeth Bunker. Now, if anybody watched Portals to Hell, some people were confused because everybody heard about Elizabeth Pratt. Now again,
Elizabeth Pratt is
Pratt.
also one of the wives that,
now,
officer wife, right?
yep, no, she wasn't an officer.
Wait, how many Elizabeths are there now at this point?
We have 3 Elizabeths. We have
Okay.
Elizabeth Pratt, who had a daughter, Elizabeth Pratt, and Elizabeth Bunker.
Okay.
Now, this gets us into the Screaming Lady.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I want to hear about that.
So the Screaming Lady is well documented. I've heard her multiple times. It's not an animal, it's not a hawk, it's not a fox. It's a blood-curdling scream. And to me, it's residual. It happens day, night, there's no time frame. It will just be this blood-curdling scream. And people have recorded it that have been there, so it's documented. Good, because the Army Corps of Engineers that's right next to us, they've called Philadelphia police a few times because the scream is coming from the fort. So it's documented from the Philadelphia Police Department of them coming out, reporting to these screams coming from Fort Mifflin. Elizabeth Pratt,
The mother.
the mother, there was a book that came out called Haunted Philadelphia. And in the book Haunted Philadelphia, the Screaming Lady description is about Elizabeth Pratt. Now, the story that was written in the book is Elizabeth Pratt had a teenage daughter that fell in love with a enlisted soldier. But since the daughter was the daughter of an officer, she had to marry an officer. So she ends up running away with the enlistment soldier. So of course now he's deserted, AWOL. So the mother has nothing to do with Elizabeth. The daughter.
The daughter.
Elizabeth has nothing
She's
to do with her daughter.
disowned.
Yep, she just ran out. So eventually word gets back that the daughter dies. Supposedly this causes Elizabeth, the mother Elizabeth, to go nuts and screams and screams. And they supposedly locked her upstairs in one of the closets upstairs in the officers' quarters. There would have been 2 officer families upstairs, 2 officer families downstairs. So she was supposed to be up in the apartments up on the left side.
And those aren't big.
They aren't big.
So the officers' quarters where we saw the shadow figure.
No, that's
Okay.
the common.
That's where the porch,
Yeah.
there's.
Yeah.
The
okay.
porch and the peaches were in there.
Okay, yes. Okay.
Yeah, but that was
Yeah, it's
Just
not
small.
big.
just the room.
Yeah, that's
for-
it. Yeah, you're in there with your family.
Yep.
And yeah, so supposedly she went nuts and then somehow broke out of the closet and hung herself off the railing. It was told over and over and over again, and even when Ghost Hunters Taps, the first episode, they came to Fort Mifflin, that story was repeated because that was the story that was out there. But then later on we had an historian to check, and Elizabeth Pratt did live at the fort and she had children. But she had an infant son, and that was actually born at the fort, and she had a young daughter named Elizabeth. And they were there in the early 1800s, so it was the yellow fever time.
Right, so it was before the well before, it would have been the
Well
Civil War.
before now.
Like generation before.
Yeah, so she was actually married to a sergeant, so she wasn't married to an officer. Now, the officers' quarters wasn't built in 1814. So she's there in the early 1800s. So she's there before the officers' building was even built.
So where would they have stayed? They couldn't have stayed in the officers' quarters.
They would have been down towards the artillery shed.
Okay,
They would have been a shack down there where she would have lived with her husband, Sergeant Pratt.
okay.
Okay.
Unfortunately, her infant son, who didn't even get a name, dies in July of 1802. and then the daughter Elizabeth ends up dying December of 1802.
And what did they die from?
Yellow fever.
Yellow fever.
And then Elizabeth herself dies in February of 1803.
Okay.
So they all died well before the officers' building.
And were they buried on site?
They were buried on site, yes. They were buried. Their graves were actually exhumed in the 1870s.
Okay.
And then relocated to the National Cemetery that was established in Philadelphia.
Okay.
So a lot of people still go by that episode of Ghost Hunters.
Yeah.
I'm hearing about Elizabeth Pratt as the screaming lady.
But the dates are way off.
They're way off. Now, is Elizabeth Pratt, could she be the screaming lady? Yes, she could actually be the screaming lady because
She would have had her children
died
die.
and her daughter dies, so it could be her. And it could be Elizabeth
And
Bunker.
frankly, if I was hanging out there and all these people were dying of yellow fever, I would have been a little bit upset too, maybe
Yeah,
off my rocker.
right.
You know, that can, well, you know, if you think about the conditions.
You're watching people dying around you.
And you're
sick.
like you're stuck there. I mean, it's just not
Yeah.
like you can walk up the street and go into a
Yeah,
shop.
I mean, it's inevitable.
Yeah. And it's a nasty disease. It's called
Yeah.
yellow fever because
yes.
your kidneys shut down,
Right.
so you get
You
jaundice.
get jaundiced.
And so, yeah. I mean, Elizabeth is the name people pick up all the time. So that's why it could be Elizabeth Pratt, it could be Elizabeth Bunker, we don't know. So I just always like to get that out.
Thank you for listening. If you have a story you'd like to tell us, please email us at onlyghostsinthebuilding@gmail.com, or you can find us on Instagram at Only Ghosts in the Building or Facebook at Only Ghosts in the Building. We also have a Patreon at patreon.com/Only Ghosts in the Building, and you can come join for free, or we have a $1 a month tier or a $5 a month tier. Come check us out. We have a lot of good content there. I really enjoy the app and all its capabilities. You can listen, you can watch, and you can read and check out all our content right on there. We have merch for sale at onlyghostinthebuilding.com. There's some really cute stuff, including kids' clothes. Go check that out. Thank you so much. We will see you soon.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.